Welcome to the Firearms Nation podcast. I'm your host, Ark Levy. And have you ever had a moment when you're trying to take a shot and you just felt like you just had to break the shot right now? And it turns out that when you do that, you jerk the trigger and you said to yourself, God, my sights were lined up and it didn't work. Why? Well, we're going to get into that today with my guest who's developed a system that'll help you get past that. And I'm speaking tonight with Joel Turner from Shot IQ. And he's got a long history of not only being on a SWAT team as a sniper, but as an archer and bow hunter, and has coached a lot of people. And so it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So thank you for coming by. And Joel, thank you for coming on the Firearms Nation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you were, like I said in the quick little intro that I just did, you were part of the SWAT team. You're out in Washington, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So how long have you been, you're retired now. How long were you on the team for?
I was on the team for just shy of 19 years, and I did just shy of 21 years in law enforcement. So I got on the team fairly early in my law enforcement career. And also 2 years into my career is when I became a firearms instructor as well. So been at it for quite a while.
Okay. And were you always, I mean, you're out in Washington and everyone thinks of Washington as like guys just walking around with bows all the time, you know, and shooting things and hunting and stuff. You know, out here on the East Coast, I mean, we're like, that's crazy. It's different. But so were you always passionate about firearms, or were you strictly, you know, doing bows and stuff like that?
No, I've been just passionate about shooting my entire life. I started shooting very early on. I started shooting centerfire rifles when I was 5, which was kind of a nightmare. But I started shooting a bow when I was 7, and I've just been completely and totally life involved in shooting in all aspects my whole life.
Now, did you come from a family who preached that sort of thing? Was your dad a cop? Was your dad in law enforcement?
No, Dad wasn't in law enforcement. My dad was a logger, and my mom was actually in law enforcement. But my dad was a shooter from, I mean, we were shooting all the time, and at 9 years old, we would always get our BB guns. So I have 2 older brothers, and when my oldest brother, who's 3 years older than me, he got his BB gun at 9, and he never shot it, and I shot it so much that I wore it out. And then my other brother got his when he turned 9, and I was only 8, and I wore his out in less than a year. So when I turned 9, my dad bought me a little bit better model. So it was just on from there.
Now, your dad, you said he was a shooter. So was he the one that originally started to coach you in how to shoot?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, he didn't really know how to make me a better shooter. He just wanted to expose us to shooting, and it was just the basics, right? Just put your sights on and squeeze the trigger as slowly as you could. And that was it, and that's the same instruction that millions of other people have gotten as well, from fathers, mothers, granddads, whatever it may be. That's always been the instruction, is just, put the sights on and squeeze a trigger. Squeeze it as slowly as you can. There's all this, let it surprise you. There's lots of stuff, myths in firearms that we're going to dispel tonight.
But you also did bow hunting, because I know that's you're known for your bow hunting and your archery instruction. Where did that come into play with your shooting? Now, I know you've said shooting too, and it was funny because I was listening to some previous interviews and you were talking about shooting, but you're talking about shooting arrows, not shooting bullets. And from my frame of reference, it's always been shooting bullets. So how did the whole shooting arrows get involved?
Well, I started shooting a bow when I was 7, and shot anticipation in archery is 100-fold what it is with a firearm. Not knowing any better when I was 7 years old, just slinging arrows out in the yard, and by the time I was 8, I was dealing with the same shot anticipation as every adult out there, and being locked off target or releasing the string early or whatever. And it was happening in my firearms as well. If you gave me a BB gun, I was able to do what my dad told me. I was able to squeeze that trigger slowly. But if you gave me a centerfire rifle, it was a nightmare, Flinch City on those things. And I was not a good shot. And I was not a good shot with a bow. I was just completely enamored with shooting. I just loved watching the flight of the arrow. I loved shooting cans, any type of reactive targets. I just loved it and I lived it. And so that's all I did growing up. Everything I did was based around shooting and hunting, just not being that successful in it. And, life went on, college. And then during college, I became a wildlife specialist for the USDA. And that involved a lot of shooting, a lot of air rifle work in that animal damage control and a lot of shotgunning. And I was good at those things, right? When I didn't have to worry about flinching on a trigger, I was good. But in the archery world at that time, still massive shot anticipation, locked off target. It's crazy what happens in the human mind when you shoot an arrow. And it's a lot easier to shoot a firearm because in a firearm the explosion happens in the apparatus and recoil is imparted upon you, but that's easier to override it's easier to override your central nervous system in that regard. But when you deal with archery, the explosion happens throughout your body. So, people don't see archery as an explosion, but the definition of an explosion is a sudden release of energy. And in archery, your mind really wants to know when that sudden release of energy is going to happen so that it can brace you for impact, brace you for the recoil of that bow going off. Same thing that happens in firearms. We see it as a flinch. But in firearms, there's numerous mechanisms that are in place, like a safety, dummy rounds, all these things that you can actually see pre-ignition movements. You can't ever see that in archery because the bow fires every time, right? So it's much more difficult to see and to map and do all those things in archery. So these two things were happening at the same time. I'm failing in archery and also failing in any precision firearms work. But if you put me on an air rifle, a 22 long rifle, or a shotgun, I'm your guy, right? But and then after, when I became a full-time wildlife specialist, it became evident when I would get on coyote contracts, because you're in the middle of a city and you get one chance to take out a problem coyote. And you call this thing in and you're shooting between houses or whatever you need to do to get this thing as safe as you possibly can. But if we did it with a centerfire rifle, I was not your guy, because every time the reticle would get on that coyote, I'm only thinking it's going to get away. So my thought process was very skewed in those. And then if you're thinking it's going to get away, you're going to rush the trigger. And that's what we see in all aspects of shooting now. But now we know the actual science of what's happening.
Okay, so I want to go back. And so out here on the East Coast, we have Fish and Wildlife Commission, which is our state enforcement of hunting laws and fishing laws, and they'll take out a gator or python or whatever that we need to. What is a wildlife? What was it called? A wildlife.
So it's the wildlife specialist with USDA
Specialist.
USDA Wildlife Services. They're in every state. It's a branch of the wildlife of USDA that deals with animal damage control. And
Okay, what is damage control?
State. So, like, if you have Canada geese on a runway of an airport,
okay,
right? If you have beaver damage that's flooding that you don't want to deal with, coyotes that are attacking livestock, or wolves that are attacking livestock, grizzly bears, all the stuff that's federally protected deals with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and USDA Wildlife Services. So it's a branch of the USDA that very few people know about. And
okay. And what do you do specifically? You just go there to neutralize the animals?
You do a lot of hazing, so you're scaring a lot of things away. But there is
Okay.
lethal control as well that happens with that. So that's where I got a lot of my firearms experience as well, is in those situations. It's it's wild, but what those agents do.
So real quick, I want to ask you, because I find this fascinating. What was the craziest thing you had to take out?
We did a lot of goose work, and a lot of times you would get geese, or a pair of geese, that would nest in a little pond in the middle of an old folks home, of a retirement home. And these geese would, when they would hatch their babies, the geese would come out and literally attack the people. And you're knocking people over, and they're breaking they're breaking hips and all kinds of stuff. So that's when they would call the USDA to come in and take care of that. And I can remember one night where we were out and we're using suppressed air rifles, and there was a pair of geese to take out, and my buddy, he was another agent, he wanted to do the shooting that night. I'm like, okay. So I let him do the shooting, and he did what we call cheek patching one. So he hit it too far forward, and it basically ran up on this person's patio, and we had to sneak onto the patio to catch this thing with a net. And it got away, and it ran over this other patio and got up inside a barbecue and knocked the barbecue over. And we're dressed in all black. We've got our USDA patches on our shoulders, and we're running around with these big old suppressed air rifles, look like some type of nuclear magnum, And this little old lady, she hears, because this barbecue's on her porch, it tips over, and she opens the door and she goes, "Is everything okay?" And my buddy goes, "Don't be alarmed, ma'am. USDA." Like, what does that mean? And she just closes her door like, I don't know what's happening out there. So, oh yeah, we did all kinds of crazy things. So
no bears?
No, we didn't. I didn't do any bear work. I wasn't one of the specialists, but there are specialists that do a lot of bear work.
I can imagine. When you were talking about that, I was thinking, it's got to be, and I got to look this up one day, but it's got to be, I want to say early 2000s. I don't know if you know this story or not. You were on the West Coast, but I remember hearing it out here because I know I was on the job at the time. And the story was these two guys were at the San Francisco Zoo, and there was a tiger, and they were throwing those little bottles of alcohol that you get on the plane. They were throwing those at the tiger. Okay. And they thought they were drunk themselves, but they were throwing at the tiger. And the tiger got so pissed off that he jumped up from the paddock that he was in. And they ran into the food court area, which is kind of ironic, right? Ran into the food court area. Yeah. And this tiger was in the crowd, didn't go after anybody else, but went after them. Knew where they were, went them, and basically mauled them. Right. And then, San Francisco PD, their SWAT team, had to go in with fire rescue to not only get these guys out, but to neutralize the tiger. Right. And I could just imagine the thought process, and it's nighttime, and I have to go into the zoo to take out a tiger. That's got to be scarier than going after any person. I don't know, how do you prepare for something like that?
Well, so I train zoo shooting teams now. It's one thing that I do. And so if a zoo has dangerous species like that, they are required to have a shooting team. And so usually, if they have an elephant on scene, they'll have 375 H&H, a lot of 12 gauge slug stuff. But these people, we're having to train them to do exactly what we do in police work, but to the nth degree, because if they actually get involved in a situation like this, it's going to be a big deal. And so I do train those teams currently. And that's one of the things that I'll branch out and do more of. But yeah, it's pretty interesting because these tigers have you ever seen a tiger?
Of course.
In a zoo or something? Oh, yeah. Man, those green eyes just look right through you. So they're pretty
terrifying.
They're wicked critters for sure.
And agile and strong and predatory. Yeah. And, no, thank you. That would have been a tough night to go into those guys deserved it. What do you want from me? I know up down here in Florida, Orange County Sheriff's Office, they used to, I don't know if they still do, but I remember speaking with some supervisors there. They have 450 bear wolves for to take down elephants and other, because I don't know if you remember this, there was a rampaging elephant in Hawaii, in Honolulu. Did you ever see that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it got loose and it was rampaging. And how do you stop it? It was destroying cars.
Right.
they were shooting at it and nothing. What? They're stupid handguns. It's not going to do anything to me.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, they look at these things and they say, okay, we have to have some sort of plan. But that's interesting
Right.
that you train them.
Hmm.
You so you do a lot of hunting as well out there with the
Yeah.
bow. So is that so? Was that your like genesis of getting into the bow hunting? Was the fact that you were into shooting and you had the bow and that was something that you did with your family?
Yeah. I rifle hunted with my dad starting at the age of 11. Then at the age of 14, I started bow hunting and getting into the whole calling elk and all that stuff. So yeah, bow hunting's been my passion since I was 14 years old, and synonymous with firearms. I do a lot of rifle hunting as well, but yeah, most of my firearm stuff then started to be out of necessity because I got into law enforcement. So
So tell me about that transition. So how young did you get into law enforcement?
I was 24 years old, and at that time, as soon as I turned 21, I got my concealed weapons permit, and I bought a Glock 23, and I couldn't hit anything with it. Like everything's shooting low and left. I'm like, what's wrong with the sights on this thing, right? So then I get in the academy, and in the academy, I was smarter because I bought a gosh, what was it? It was a Para Ordnance 1445 double stack, double action only trigger. It was brand new for that year, and this was 2001. And so I shot that, and I shot that better than I did my Glock, unbeknownst to me as to why. But my partner, another deputy there, he was not going to pass. He was not going to pass the midterm test, and I had no way to, I didn't know anything about firearms instruction at the time. I thought, man, try my gun. So he ends up shooting my Para Ordnance 1445. I went out and bought I bought a Kimber 1911 because I didn't want to get into that big nasty trigger stroke, not knowing what I know now. But so he passed, I passed, and we spent our careers together in law enforcement. So, but we did a mechanical fix to a mental problem at the
Mm-hmm.
time and got ourselves through it. And luckily, we worked for agencies that allowed us to carry whatever we wanted to. Um, so that was it, though. There's a lot of that out there as mechanical fixes to mental problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so I started in law enforcement. I took first in my class in firearms, and I even got to start into some firearms instruction, working people through remedial and stuff like that, because I got to be a fairly good shooter, not knowing why I was a good shooter. And then 2 years into it, that sheriff's office was going to lay me off just because of budget issues. So I looked for employment elsewhere, and there was a local city that I'd worked with a lot of those officers, and so I went to that city with I kind of had some demands as I went there, which is not usually the case, but I wanted to be a firearms instructor, and I wanted to be eligible to get on the SWAT team, even though I was on probation with that agency for the first 6 months. And so they granted me that. I went to work for those folks, and I became a firearms instructor and got on the SWAT team in 2003. And so I left. Our firearms instructor school was at the academy, and I'd only been there 2 years earlier, so I knew the firearms instructors at the academy. And I said, "How do I become a firearms instructor here?" And they said, "Well, you just got to show up and start working your way into the program." So I graduated on Friday, and I was at their doorstep on Monday, and that's when I became an instructor at the academy, at the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, as an adjunct instructor. And then come 2009, that's when I got on full time with it.
So you wanted to be an instructor. What made you want to do that? What did you think that you can offer uh, the officers at that time?
Well, at that time, I was just going through my head as to why am I shooting better now? How am I controlling myself? And I started into really working with the students, with the recruits, and just figuring out how does their mind actually work in these things? How did it work for me? And how does their mind work for them? And I started to have a pretty significant amount of impact on these people because other instructors that were using traditional means were not able to fix these people and they started to send them to me, which felt good to me. But I really had to buckle down and really figure this stuff out, because there was nothing out there in anything that I read, anything that I watched, that really boiled down to the main problems, the core problems in shooting in the human mind.
So what were the traditional means that you were seeing that wasn't having any effect on people?
So if I was to give you a scenario, I mean, you being a firearms instructor, if I had a student that was, let's say, 5 rounds, 5 seconds, 5 yards, right? Simple drill. 5 rounds, 5 seconds, 5 yards. And you see it's a right-handed shooter and you see low left impacts. What would you see as the problem?
So what I know now, I'm going to say that they're yanking the trigger, they're slapping the shots, or they're shooting a Glock.
Okay.
No, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for that one.
Yeah.
But no,
Okay.
because the Glock, the reason I say the Glock is because it's a difficult trigger to learn. And a lot of
Okay.
people, and I've seen that in a lot of shooters, is that they're going to jam through that and they're just going to put too much into what they're doing with their trigger finger, and they usually shoot it low and left.
Okay. So, and that's what we thought for decades, right? That it's, you're slapping the trigger, you're yanking the trigger, stop yanking the trigger, stop doing that. We would go dummy rounds, and we would do dummy rounds on the trigger until we saw no pre-ignition movements linked to the trigger motor program, right? Until we saw
Right.
no flinch happen, right? So, and as far as more traditional means, the instructor would be yelling front sight, front sight, front sight.
Yes, I remember hearing
And
that many times.
many times, right? Well, is the front sight really the problem,
No.
right? Because you identified the problem as slapping the trigger, but they keep yelling front sight. So this is how it really boils down, as to how do you put your conscious mind where it needs to be at this moment of truth in one shot. So I started to work through this stuff, and my light bulb moment was, I was dealing with a recruit, and it was slow fire. It was 20 yards, but his bullets are hitting the floor of the range at 15 yards. So his pre-ignition movements, his flinch was intense, right? He's very nervous cat. His movements were very fast. He would speak fast, and you've seen these personalities before. It does not lend itself to good shooting. So I got on the driver's side of his pistol, right? So I'm on the side of his pistol. I don't know if you can see this. So I got to where I could see the tip of his finger, and I said, okay, here's what I need you to do. I need you to press the trigger just to the pressure wall. That's all I need you to do. Just get to the pressure wall. He's shooting a Glock. I said, just get to the pressure wall. He said, okay, yes, sir. So he presses it to the pressure wall. I'm like, okay, I need you to start pressing the trigger, but don't make the gun go off. Okay, so he started pressing the trigger, and as soon as I saw basically the blood leaving the capillary beds of his finger, right, the white spot in his finger, once I saw that start to grow, I'm like, okay, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. And I'm talking him through this, and I'm watching his finger move at the exact rate of my speech, right? So I'm talking him through this shot, and all of a sudden, shot breaks as a surprise. It goes in the 10 ring, and he's like, "Oh man, that scared me." I'm like, "Yeah, it's supposed to, right?" So that was my light bulb moment. So I started writing things, right? So I started writing. I wrote an instructor's guide called "The Mental Mechanics of Shooting," an instructor's guide. And so in there, I talked about talking yourself through these shots, and how previously we'd always said front sight, front sight, front sight. But why was it said more than once, and in a rhythm, in a mantra style speech? And so I wrote all this stuff. It was all the baby steps of this whole Shot IQ program. And one of the sniper instructors for a police department, he was actually an anesthesiologist. So he was like a reserve officer, but he was a sniper on the SWAT team. He was also their doctor, right? So he read this article and he said, "Oh, that's neurolinguistic programming." I said, "Wait a minute, doc, that is a big word. I need to know what that means." And when you look it up, neurolinguistic programming is always used for self-help stuff, get yourself out of the gutter, beat addiction, all this stuff. It's never been used in shooting. it was used in shooting, but unbeknownst to the firearms instructors, they always said front sight, front sight, front sight. They would tell you about your grip. They would tell you about your stance, but then they would never put your conscious mind back in the trigger, which was the problem area, right? So we started to really fine tune on how to actually put your conscious mind into movements, especially a movement that causes an explosion, like a trigger movement. So that's where it all started. And when I asked you that question, what would you do for this shooter? And you said that they're obviously yanking the trigger. Well, anytime that they're in a non-precision gunfight, like anything that's close and it's shot at the speed of life, right? You're not going to be smooth on the trigger. There's two different control systems that govern your movements. One's an open loop control system, and you probably heard about this on Rogan, right? One's open loop. Open loop means the brain sends a motor program to the effector. The effector is what is the muscle group that catches the motor program. But with open loop, that's fast. It's not slow enough you can actually gain feedback within it. So it's similar to a CQB trigger press, right? Remember that student had 5 rounds, 5 seconds, 5 yards. So they are going, if that's a real situation, they are going to be open loop on the trigger. We can't stop that. So one of the big firearms myths is that you're slapping the trigger. Well, you are going to slap the trigger. I mean, you could put a dummy round in any competition shooter's pistol during an event if they're shooting fast, and you would see pre-ignition movements that are linked to the trigger motor program. I mean, you have to slap the trigger to go that fast, but you've reduced the weight of the trigger and the stroke length of the trigger to the point where your open loop motor programs your pre-ignition movements have a very slight range of motion. Whereas in a Glock, if you're pressing a trigger and you haven't even got to the pressure wall yet, if you're yanking all the way through that thing, there's a huge range of motion there, right? In the pre-ignition movement. So to fix it, it's not to stop slapping the trigger, it's to pre-brace the body. So as a firearms instructor, do you ever tell people a percentage of how tight they should hold their pistol?
Yes. In my career of doing it, it started off, 70-30 and,
Right.
more with, and then got to the point where people are like, well, how do you know? And towards the end, as I got into more competition, it's just grip the gun. You're going to grip the gun anyways. I'm not going to worry about, the only thing I worry about is I don't want you gripping too hard that you induce some sort of trigger freeze because you're gripping so hard with your gun hand. I prefer people to relax. And I also tell people that you probably don't need to grip the gun as hard as you think you need to grip the gun, right? When I tell people to go fast, I see them tense up their shoulders, tense up their core, and they really grip down and they're, angling the gun because they have to go fast. I'm like, you can go fast. If you're going to punch me, do you have to get that tense? And they're like, no, I don't. So then why do you have to get that tense when you're going to shoot that fast? But I have been, like I said, I started doing that in 2010, 2011 when I started taking classes and doing stuff until I got into competition. And a lot of the instructors would teach you that 70-30, 60-40, all that stuff, which I guess what I think that they were trying to do is just tell you not to grip so hard with your gun hand. But I think it did cause a lot of confusion in trying to figure that out.
Right. So when you ask one of your deputies that's been in a gunfight, ask them how hard they grip their pistol, and they'll all tell you that they don't really know, but I can guarantee you that they gripped it to 100% of their grip strength. So if there's an old myth of if you grip the pistol too hard, then you'll induce something else or you won't be able to isolate your finger. That's actually impossible to do. So you can grip a pistol. In fact, you need to grip a pistol 100% of your grip strength, because what you're doing through your grip is you are limiting the range of motion of the flinch, of the pre-ignition movement that's linked to the trigger motor program. So if you only go 70% of your grip strength, the other 30% is coming in with the trigger press, whether you like it or not. Because at the moment of ignition, you'll be at 100%, whether you like it or not. It just depends on, are you leaving some on the table to be linked to the trigger motor program? So we teach, because we know this is what you're going to be in a gunfight anyways, 100%, 100%. Because if I go 100% and then I try to go 110%, there's no range of motion left. But if I only go 50, there's 50% left. And that's where the low left shot comes from, right? And most of it travels, most of it is linked to the actual trigger hand, not the support side hand. So, but if you're shooting one-handed, you're going to have to go 100% on that. So anytime you're open loop shooting, meaning you're moving the trigger faster than you can gain feedback within it, you should be going 100% in your grip strength to pre-brace the body for it. And you can also pre-brace through stance and core strength and all that stuff, because anything left on the table is allowing a range of motion for the pre-ignition movement. So the trigger slap is not the problem. It's the pre-ignition movements that are linked to it. And how much have you left on the table? So, and you'll see this, in race guns and all this stuff. It's, if you've limited the trigger stroke length and the weight of the trigger required to make the gun go off, then you've already limited the range of motion of the open loop trigger movement. So it's, once we really kind of figured this out, because for decades, I myself as well, you're slapping the trigger, got to stop slapping the trigger, got to get smoother. We'd talk them through it, but that's only for precision environments. When it's open loop, and it needs to be. You're not going to sit there with a dude at 5 yards and get your pistol out and present it to the target and talk yourself through a precision trigger press, unless you need to put one through his pupil or something, right? So most of the targets allow you to go open loop if it's closer. But then there's the whole other realm of gunfighting, which is precision. It's a very small percentage of gunfights, but it does exist. And you see these gunfights where maybe the bad guy is beyond the officer's open loop effective range, which is usually about 13 yards. That's about as far as you can go with 100%, what most people can go with 100% of their grip strength and still keep it in minute of dude, right? Keep it inside a human torso. So that other precision realm is what I really dove into, because that was my work in the sniper world and all that stuff. It was precision. So like if you go to a shot IQ instructor school or sniper school, you're going to be doing a lot of pistol shooting, even though it's a sniper school, because I just need you to learn how to control your own mind in high stress situations and actually put it in what's called the closed loop control system, which is the other control system. And that's where it's slow enough you could stop it, but fast enough you can feel it, right? That precision trigger press that we as firearms instructors have been trying to get people to do forever. Like if you have 25 yards or 50 yards in your qualification, that's where people fail, because they don't switch. They stay open loop, because open loop is the default, right? It always wants you to go, it always wants to brace you for recoil. There's the core problem in shooting is that your subconscious mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. So it takes literally a conscious override to go precision on a trigger.
Okay, on that. So what do you mean it takes a conscious override to let you go?
So if you don't decide to, you will not press a trigger with precision. Like if you just shoot, if you take a student that doesn't know anything and you just have, maybe you have them shoot some 5-yard stuff, some close stuff, and then you put a target out there at 50 and don't give them any other instruction, they will automatically go open loop on the trigger. They'll get their stance right and they'll maybe take a moment more time, but when they press that trigger, they'll go open loop at the end of it. Therefore, pre-ignition movements will be linked to the trigger motor program, and they will miss the target if it's a certain size. So when you think about this, like when you shoot let's say you're shooting a 100-meter shot with your pistol, okay? Walk me through that.
Am I
Walk me
on
through
a
that.
time am I in a time constraint, or
No,
am I
no time constraint. No time constraint. You're standing unsupported, 100 meters. I'll give you a 16-inch plate.
and what do you want from me? How
I
I
want
get
you
to
to hit
there?
the plate. I want you to hit the plate but I want you to tell me after you get to full extension on the pistol, walk me through it from there.
I have my dot or my sights aligned.
Mm-hmm.
Once they're aligned, I let them go, and I
Mm-hmm.
work the trigger, and I feel the trigger go. I just breathe and let the trigger go. I just feel it keep going,
Mm-hmm.
going, and going, and then it'll eventually go off.
Okay. Why did you say that 3 times and in a rhythm? You said going, 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 right?
Because I'm feeling
So
the trigger
anytime,
go each time.
yes. So every time that the conscious mind is attempting concentration, it will always come up with a speech pattern. It's always said more than once and in a rhythm, right? So you doing that, like if you use the word going, or if you use the word keep pressing or whatever, that doesn't just happen. Like if you're thinking, oh my gosh, this guy's going to kill me, right? If you're thinking that, you'll never go closed loop on a trigger. You'll never go going, going, going because you're thinking, oh my God, this guy's going to kill me. So it's the ability to decide and switch to do the conscious override and go, now this guy's going to try to kill me, but if I don't press the trigger perfectly, it's not going to work out, right?
Well, at
So,
100 meters, I'm not worried about the guy killing me other than taking a shot.
right.
I
Have
mean,
you
he's
been
not
shot
on
at?
top of me.
I the
So
last
you
time
know
I
what
got
I'm.
shot at was, yeah, I know what you mean.
So there's
The
a
last time I
difference
got,
in yeah.
yeah, the last time I got shot at was the guy was 140 yards from me, and it was crazy because I was watching him shoot at me through binoculars. And it just so happened I was glassing looking for this guy, and when I finally found him, he was at full extension, right, with a 357, and he cracked that round off. And it's you're like, well, what are the odds? But he's still slinging lead at you, so it's you still have that moment of having to think about it. But anytime you recognize a precision shot, like, oh, that's far, or oh, that's small, whatever it may be, you have to switch your mind to actually press the trigger perfectly. And that is the skill. It's being able to switch between open loop and closed loop instantly once you recognize a precision environment. And that's the hiccup that most officers have, is they don't either know how to switch or they don't realize that they need to switch. Like in a high risk vehicle stop, we practice in a high risk vehicle stop here, where maybe it's a pursuit, whatever it is, murder suspect, whatever, high risk stuff will come in, and then the officers will usually get behind their vehicle, which increases distance, which usually puts them outside their open loop effective range with a pistol. So we very much emphasize the use of rifles with high risk vehicle stops, just because with a rifle you can go open loop on a trigger and still remain effective out to 100 yards or whatever you need to. But with a pistol, it's 13 to 15, somewhere in there is where things really start to not hit what you need to hit with a pistol if you go open loop.
Well, that's
So,
one of the reasons why I always profess to my students that you should get out and compete,
oh sure.
because you put yourself in a situation where you're going to have close targets, you're going to have hard targets at
Mm-hmm.
distance, and you're going to have
Yep.
to learn to adjust on the fly as you're moving and running and
Yep.
squatting and doing all sorts of other things, where
Absolutely.
it's not just going to be at a on a flat range where the target's
Mm-hmm.
not moving and you have all the you're not worried about what you're doing either. I guess if you were hunting lion too, you'd feel that same kind of stress.
It's exactly the same when you have to, when you compete, you get to shoot with adrenaline in your system. And again, the skill is evaluating your environment instantly and going, oh, I got to switch. Or if you're running close, it doesn't really take that decision. And if you don't decide, you're going to go open loop anyways. So it's very interesting how firearms instruction has for so long been stuck in this trying to fix the trigger press in an open loop environment, when that's not the problem. It's the movements that are linked to it. It's the bracing movements based on that core problem in shooting. So it's very interesting. And when you understand these things, you completely change how you teach your firearms work to your officers.
So, okay, another big issue in teaching officers is
Mm-hmm.
depending on what agency and how much of a staff you have, you're not given that much exposure to the officers.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they come once a year.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get them for a class, and then they have qualifications. That's about it for
Mm-hmm.
touching their guns. How do
Mm-hmm.
you get this to them quickly so they? And you have to excuse me. We are having a pretty severe storm outside. If the power goes, I'll try and reach out to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, if how do you, in the short amount of time, how do you capture this for them?
So that's across the country. Officers get to shoot once, twice, maybe 4 times a year. But if you had 5 minutes to spend with somebody, how would you spend it? Is what would you say, in your opinion, is more important than actually shooting? What skill with a firearm is more important than actually making lead come out the barrel?
Are you asking me what I teach
Yeah,
to people? Well,
if you just had like 5 minutes to spend with somebody, would you teach them to shoot or would you teach them to blank? What would it be?
well, I guess for me, I would want them to be able to draw their gun on a target every time, so they're not
That is
worried about.
that's the presentation of the pistol to the target or the rifle to the target is more important than making lead come out the end of it. Because in the presentation, and that's where you really find this in bow hunters nowadays that are carrying pistols for grizzly bears. They very rarely ever shoot their pistol, and even more rare is that they actually pull the pistol out and present it to a target in a fashion that is smooth and efficient and has three things at the end of it, right? By the time you get to full extension, you should have sight alignment, sight picture, and slack out of the trigger, right? Because you've already made the decision to shoot. That's why you're pointing at the target. I don't know how you guys train there, but we don't train. We're not pointing guns at people and then giving them verbal commands. We're staying at a low ready position. And then if we make a decision to shoot, then and only then do we actually push our gun out. But that's how you train. You've trained this getting the pistol out and then a straight push to target so that you have all those three things every single time you go to full extension, so that when you get in your high stress event, and I know you've talked to lots of people that have been in gunfights, very rarely, if it's a CQB event, if it's close and fast, as most gunfights tend to be, very rarely are people actually seeing their sights.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to know that if you get to full extension, your front sight is in your rear sight, and whatever you are looking at is your sight picture. When you get to that point, then you are proficient enough to go out and carry a gun around.
Well,
But go
that's why
ahead.
I tell them that you got to dry practice every day, 10 minutes every day,
Absolutely.
so you
Right.
get
So
that
that's
subconscious
yeah.
skill set that every time I draw my gun, I know it's going to be on target.
You're set. I mean, your instruction is spot on. It's so much more important for people to know how to present their pistol or their rifle to the target and have all those things by the time they get to full extension. Because when you go, if you had this model student, if you taught them the presentation of the pistol to target, and then you taught them to go full grip strength, 100%, 100% in their hands, you've just fixed 99% of the gunfighting issue, right? I mean, all you got to do now is make it go off, and you're going to be open loop anyways. But if you've pre braced and you've presented the pistol to target where it needs to be, you're good to go, right? So I realize we only get once a year, twice a year, maybe, but if they're doing 10 minutes of dry practice a day, that's plenty of times to actually shoot, right? And then what you would be doing in that one or two times you get to shoot is testing those skills, but then also introducing the switch to close loop. So I would have my guys shoot very close, 3 yards, maybe very fast. They may do 5, 6, who knows how many rounds, doesn't really matter. They're burning that target down. excuse me, and then instantly switching to a 100-meter target or 100-yard target with their pistols. So they'd go open loop fast, right? They're working the trigger. They've got their sight in the middle. Things are happening. And then they got to instantly switch to a 100-yard target where they have to completely switch their mind, make that decision, and talk themselves through the shot.
Are you familiar with Bruce Gray? Have you ever heard of Bruce? He's out in your neck of the woods.
I've heard the name, and doesn't he do some mind stuff with? Hasn't he written a book?
No, I don't think he's written a book yet. But he's been on my show. He's been a friend of mine for a long time. He is a gunsmith.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hang on a second.
Don't worry, it's only live. No one cares.
Yeah, I know. This thing's hard to mute too.
Don't worry, Joel's coming right back.
Yeah, I'm coming right back. Sorry, here I am. Apologize.
Anyways, so Bruce, he's been a competitive shooter. He's an instructor, gunsmith, anything related to SIG. That's his specialty.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the parts in the 320 are coming from him, but he's out in Oregon. But I remember when I first met him, he talked about something that you talk about. He talked about the anxiety of aiming, and it's funny because I experienced it before. I and sometimes you still experience it where you just want to get that release. And I'm not even talking about archery with the arrow. I'm talking about with firearms.
Yes.
When you aim in on a target, especially at a more distant target, right, at 25 yards and back, and you're aiming at that target, and you're trying for a good shot, but you're aiming it, and then I got to let the shot go because I just want to feel that release. So there is that anxiety. And you talk a lot about this anxiety, especially when it comes to archery shooting. So where is that anxiety coming from, and what do you do to overcome it?
So, like I said, with the core problem in shooting, your subconscious mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. It makes intuitive sense for us to shoot a shot the instant that we see the sights are on the target. And so even to the point where sometimes when you aim at a distant target, if you keep your mind in the aim where it doesn't need to be, because there's a system called visual proprioception that actually brings it back to the center. And it was interesting because when you described your 100-yard shot, you said that you would let them go, right? You aimed your pistol and then you let it go. That is the skill in itself, because to keep your conscious mind in it doesn't help you. In fact, it actually hinders your trigger press. So the instant your mind sees this aim as on, it wants to link the aim to the explosion. That's why people get a little jitter in there, or they actually have a body tremor. In archery, a lot of times people can't even get their sight on the target. It will lock off the target, and then they'll jump to target and let the string go all at the same time. It's called target panic. It's just another form of shot anticipation. So what we do about that is we understand that it does not help us to put our conscious mind in the aim. You simply set the aim and then you let go of it, right? Because if you continue to watch it, it's always returning to the center, especially in a firearms. If you're shooting a pistol with iron sights, it's not, it's moving in the notch, but they always said equal light, equal height, right? Well, equal light on each side is impossible to hold. You can't actually hold equal light on each side. And equal height, you can actually hold, but you just do that through vision. As long as you're not trying to line up three dots, you're lining up the tops of the sights. So your mind has an easier time with lines than it does three dots. But when you get on the target, when your sights are aligned in a precision environment, when your sights are on the target, it's not time to shoot. It's time to decide. So when you make this decision in what we call the critical second, because anytime somebody rushes a shot, it is fired within 1 second of you believing the aim was complete. So if you fire a shot within 1 second of you believing the aim was complete, that means that to do that, you would have to go open loop on the trigger, which if you go open loop on the trigger faster than you can gain feedback within it, you will have pre-ignition movements linked to the trigger motor program. So we have people say something at that specific moment of truth, that critical second. So if you were to jump off a cliff, how would you go about that? You've stepped out to the edge of the cliff, you got your little toesies hanging over the edge, and you're looking down there. And if you look down there, and if you're thinking in the future, like, ooh, I don't know if that water's deep enough, right? If I jump off this cliff, I might die, whatever. If you're thinking in the future, like, oh, gee, I hope I hit this target, you will never do a movement that causes your body impact. It's not until you bring yourself in. So you got your toes hanging over the edge, you're like, here I go. That's the conscious override. Think about somebody jumping off a cliff. They don't just jump off a cliff. They decide to do a movement that causes their body impact. That's the conscious override. So on your pistol shooting, so that you can step away from the aim, understand that just being on the target, now this is a precision environment. This is not close and fast. In a precision environment, once you put your sights on the target, then you've taken the slack out of the trigger, then it's here I go. We have them actually say, here I go, and that starts the concentration. And again, concentration runs through speech. So for you in that one shot, it was slacks out, sights are on, here I go, going, 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 till the shot breaks. For me, it would be keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. It doesn't matter what you say as long as you are speaking about the movement. That's how you direct and trap your conscious mind into a muscle group, especially for a movement that causes an explosion. Because your central nervous system won't let you just do that. It wants to time the event, right? It wants to time that trigger press so that it can brace you for impact. That's what it's built for. So literally to get the surprise break requires a decision, and a decision increases presence because now we're actually doing this thing. And once you're present enough, then and only then can you concentrate, and concentration runs through speech.
Yeah, I think
So that's
go ahead.
no, I mean you described your shot, your 100-yard shot. You described it to a T. You described it like a great shooter describes a shot. If you have a mediocre shooter, they talk nothing about the trigger press. Ask them, okay, give me this 100-yard shot. What are you going to do? And they say, okay, well, I get my stance, I get steady, I get my sights on the target, and then I'm just going to let it eat. Right? They don't even talk about intimate details about the trigger press as you did, right? With your going, going, going. Even the way that you spoke, I can hear your storm there. But the way that you spoke is the speech of a very experienced shooter, successful shooter. But I'm telling you, across the board of all the gunfighters that I've interviewed, across the snipers, the bow hunters, the rifle hunters, the one pattern of success, the one commonality in all these people that have been in precision environments is they all say something during their shot. Not one of them ever does it blank-minded. They all say something. They all say something different, but they all say something. And it's usually very specifically after the aim and before the trigger press. It's the here I go. It's the critical second. So when you get a chance, ask some of the people that you know that have been in these situations, have been in precision gunfights or sniper work or whatever, and they'll tell you what, and just ask them, what do you say to yourself when you shoot? And that'll open up their world to you. It's very interesting.
So when you were talking about the archery, I have real no other than when I was a kid playing around with the bow and trying to be Robin Hood.
Yeah.
The archery aspect of it does sound so similar to pistol shooting in terms of, like you were saying, that they want to break the shot, they want to let go of it, that they over aim, right? Because you can only aim once you've aimed, you can't aim anymore. So
Right. Right.
It's interesting that you say that people are doing with archery. Do you think that it's a good balance? Um, the stuff you're teaching for pistol, also teaching for archery, it kind of works together.
Absolutely. It's easier with a firearm, but with a firearm, there's an actual explosion that happens. So, if you're having issues with that, go shoot a high caliber pistol, right? If you're having trouble in archery, go shoot a high caliber pistol with precision and then understand and blueprint exactly how you did it. And by blueprint, I mean, like if you have this, let's say you're shooting a 460 Smith and Wesson, right? Pretty significant recoil, and you work through that double action, okay? And so you are working through this big old X-frame Smith and you're working through that trigger. What conversation are you having with yourself, right? Especially after the second click in the hammer. What conversation are you having? So there's very specifically 4 questions that I have people ask themselves when they blueprint a shot. Number 1, what were you thinking about after here I go, which should be nothing other than the trigger press. Question number 2, what were you saying after here I go, which should be talking about the trigger press, like keep pressing, going, whatever it may be for you. Question number 3, could I have stopped it? Was I so keenly concentrated on the shot activation movement that I could have stopped it anywhere within it? And then finally, what decisions did I make? Did I actually say, here I go, after my aim and after I'd taken the slack out of the trigger? Did I actually say, here I go, to increase my presence? And there's a few other decisions that you can make in there, like we call one the half up moment. As you press the pistol out or as you bring the rifle up, are you saying something to yourself like, I'm going to do this right, or something about the process? And every decision you make increases your presence. So it's the same blueprint with firearms as it is in archery. So if you can shoot a bow with control, firearms are super easy. If you can shoot a firearm with control, you just take that blueprint into your archery shot. And that's what I did. I developed this whole system for firearms first because of out of necessity for myself. And then finally, I put it into archery. And, because it's funny because in the training world, you deal with a lot of competition shooters that train a lot, right? They shoot a lot because they're hoping that their event happens as many times as possible because they shoot in tournaments, right? Or matches, if you will, right? In archery, it's tournaments. In firearms, I guess it's matches or whatever. But when you look at the layperson that just gets their concealed pistol permit or whatever, they go through minimal training because they hope they never have to use their firearm. Whereas in archery and in competition pistol shooting or competition rifle shooting, you hope you get to do it as many times as possible. And also in the hunting world, you hope you get to shoot a lot. So just in the primal nature of training, people that are just owning guns and not training with them, it's because they really never hope. I mean, they hope they never have to get in a gunfight, and I hope they don't either. But it's it's a crazy world out there for sure. But the two training in the two, it significantly helps each. So that's what we do.
So tell me more about what your company's Shot IQ is.
So Shot IQ is basically how to control your mind in these high stress events. Be that archery, I've got online archery course, I've got an online rifle course, an online pistol course, and we really teach you how to control not just what you need to do, but how to actually. I'll show you what work needs to be done and how to do the work. But you have to understand that anytime people take instruction, they're hoping that it works for them. Any instruction, the instruction that you give to your officers or to your folks, any instruction that I give, none of it works. We're just teaching people what work needs to be done and how to do the work. So very specifically, we teach you the science of the mind and what's actually going on in your shot and how to do this conscious override. I always say we teach the conscious defiance of human nature because human nature is to punch the trigger. Right? That's natural for you to have target panic in archery or for you to punch the trigger in whatever firearm situation you're in. So learning that override is key. And I'm just started after being on Rogan. I had to like broaden my horizons a bit because Rogan talked a lot about the connection of what we do at Shot IQ and to life in general and how it can be applied. And after that podcast, I had people from all walks of life calling me for, how do we put this open and closed loop control system into our sport, and how do we do this? And I was asked a very specific question by a very smart person. And after this Rogan podcast, and they said, can you define the mental game? And I had to think about what I teach in shooting, and I said, yeah, I can define the mental game. And this is the definition that I came up with. The mental game is defined as knowing when, where, and how to direct your conscious mind into a specific task at a specific moment. That's it. Right? A one sentence definition, knowing when, where, and how to direct your conscious mind into a specific task at a specific moment. So if you can plug this in as an equation, like if you plug this into a close quarter gunfight, what's the mental game of a close quarter gunfight? You've got all the movements down. You're going open loop on the trigger. So what is most important? What's the mental game? Where do we need to put our conscious mind in a close quarter gunfight? Think about that for a second. And this is what we do in training, as we figure out when and where first, and the how is always speech. So in a close quarter gunfight, I don't need to put my conscious mind into the trigger press because I'm going open loop anyways, right? I would just like somebody to get their damn front sight on the bad guy, right? Get your dot on the bad guy. So it is all based in vision. So you need to put your conscious mind into vision or aiming in those close quarter gunfights. You need to at least get your sight in the middle of the bad guy before you go pressing on that trigger. So that's the mental game. The how is always through speech. So maybe before you go in that house or whatever, that at your moment of truth, just say the word, right? Aim or middle or whatever. Put your conscious mind into that vision. If it's a precision gunfight, the mental game shifts. Now we have to put our conscious mind into the trigger press because any other thought process is going to default us out to open loop. So we need to stay closed loop on the trigger. So we have to put our conscious mind into the trigger press through speech, right? And to do that, we got to make a decision. Here I go. And that's the mental game of that. Take it out to basketball. What's the most important thing in a free throw, right? So the basketball players got a routine that they do, right? They bounce the ball 3 times, they spin the ball, and then they shoot it. They've done it thousands of times, millions of times maybe. But then the game winner comes up. And then they bounce the ball 3 times, they spin it, they look at it like, okay, I got to break my wrist perfectly. They change their thought process and they put their conscious mind into the movement. And they actually, when they do that, they screw up the totality of the movement. So you got to know the mental game. Where do you put your conscious mind? In this free throw, it's in vision because vision is what guides the trajectory of the ball, the movement of your arms. It's all based in vision. So maybe before you actually do the shooting movement, you should say, see it, right? So when moment of truth is right before they shoot the ball, see it, and then they keep their conscious mind out of the movement. So it's this mental game equation that we now can plug into whatever our problem is: anxiety attacks, baseball, golf, anything that has to deal with conscious control of our mind. This mental game equation, it's now been defined. And we couldn't find anywhere after we came up with this, we couldn't find anywhere where it's been defined like this. So we've started a new brand called the Turner Method, and I'm coming out with an online course that deals with how do we apply all this stuff to life, and what is your, whatever your issue is, you can plug it right in. It's really cool stuff.
So I know you wrote a book. I saw that on Amazon a while ago, back in 2017. Are you
Yeah.
coming out with a new book with this concept?
Yeah, we'll be doing the book probably next year. And the original book that I wrote was Control Process Shooting, and it's actually fairly old information. And what's nice about the online courses, we can constantly update it. But people learn in different ways, and those people that want to learn by reading the book is a handy guide for. It's just based in archery. It doesn't have anything to do with firearm stuff. I mean, all the concepts are from firearms, but yeah. So there will be a new book coming. All kinds of cool stuff in the works.
Awesome. So it's Shot IQ, I think, is your website,
Yes,
and your
shotiq.com.
and your Joel Turner Shot IQ on Instagram. So you're pretty active there. I'll link those down
Yep.
below in show
Yep.
notes. Um, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this stuff
Yeah.
because it's really fascinating. It affects a lot of shooters, and no matter what your passion is, archery, rifles, handguns, all is the same. All is that breaking that shot, however you define it, and
Yep.
getting through it. So it's fascinating stuff. I hope people listen to this over and over again to get all these concepts. And obviously, I hope
Yeah.
they go sign up for one of your courses to learn more about it. So thank you
Yep.
very much for coming on the Firearms Nation podcast.
You bet. Appreciate you.